702.
World of Work.
So we are having a conversation this morning on our World of Work feature about how to navigate the gig economy. Right, this free market labor system made up of short-term jobs, contracts, or freelance work, as opposed to permanent in-house jobs. This labor market is nothing new because for centuries people have been performing temporary or freelance jobs. What has changed, though, is that technology is now enabling more widespread, flexible, and on-demand work opportunities that both companies and individuals can benefit from. In fact, Statistics South Africa's Employment Outlook has found that temporary employment rose from around 2.6 million in 2017 to around 2.9 million in 2018. And globally, the trend is also upward, with 59% of US businesses now using some degree of flexible workforce, be it's the staff working remotely or the use of freelancers. I want to know from you if this is what you prefer. Right? Do you participate in the gig economy? Is that what you prefer? And how do you make it work for you? I said earlier that back in the day when you have a permanent job, that used to be a big deal, right? And these days, people are actually intentional about getting contract work. Like more and more people will tell you, that's what I prefer. I prefer that kind of flexible work. Is that where you find yourself, and how is it working for you? Or are you a type of person that still prefers, the old-fashioned, old way of just a permanent job, and that seems to be what gives you security and gives you peace? Share your thoughts with us, please, on 011-883-0702. WhatsApp's on 0727021702. Deshun Deysel is the founder and CEO of Go Peak International, joining us on the line. Deshun, thank you so much for making time. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Nice to be on the show again.
So when we talk about the gig economy, I mean, things have really accelerated, over the last couple of years. Maybe let's start with the advent of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Did that play a critical role in accelerating the gig economy?
Thanks, Clement. I think you actually summarized the definition of gig economy so well, because it does have to do with people working in a non-traditional, non-standard kind of job where you go into the workplace and you work for 8-9 hours or whatever length of time, and you get your monthly income and you get a steady salary and you're kind of looked after by the company and so on. So you are quite right. There has been an influx, or shall I say an upswing of gig economy workers since the pandemic, but it actually did start before that, because technology actually has been the key driver of access to better freelance work. So if you think of platforms like Fiverr, for instance, before the pandemic started, Fiverr was already in place for people to be able to, showcase their skill on technology platforms across the world. And so even though those platforms already existed, it actually was accelerated by the advent of the pandemic, when people now needed to stay at home and find a way to cover themselves, and especially those who lost their jobs because of the pandemic. They needed to very, very quickly adjust their expectations of work and how they will earn an income to look after themselves and their families.
Yeah, and of course, technology plays a huge role in how people navigate the space, this gig economy, because a lot of people are doing more virtually. I'm still surprised, Deshun, to this day, that there are people who say, I have not gone back to the office since COVID-19, or I'm always working from home. I only go to the office like once every 3 months, once every 6 months. So people have still been able to hold on to jobs and still be efficient and effective while being at home.
Yeah, absolutely, Clement. It actually doesn't surprise me because of the work I do. I work with many of South Africa's blue chip organizations, and I've seen how companies have had to drag their people back to work because there are so many people who are saying, you know what, I'm far more efficient, I'm far more productive, I've got far less distractions when I'm working in my little cubicle at home, and I have the flexibility to be there for my family when needs be. So there is still a huge expectation and I would say even a demand for people to work away from the formal office. In that sense, it's not so much gig economy. They are full-time employed, but they just enjoy the idea of the remote work.
Yeah.
So your gig workers would be people who are not full-time employed. You can get gig workers who kind of have long-term gigs with organizations, long-term meaning 6 months, 12 months, and so on. But it's project-based. It doesn't mean that they are full-time employed by those organizations. But yes, certainly technology has played a huge role, especially the access to 5G networks, Wi-Fi, spaces where you can connect and speak to the rest of the world with ease.
Yeah. So I want us now to look at what works and what doesn't work when it comes to the gig economy, because there are some people that are, let's call them permanent gig workers, right? They just do these projects. They don't want anything that's going to commit them to forever. So they'll take a project for 2 years. They know there's another project they're working on for 6 months. How do they protect themselves? Because that still has a huge risk associated with.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, number one, gig work is not for everyone. People who prefer to have the security of having full-time permanent employment, where they're working towards retirement plans and pension plans, and they've got medical aid covered by companies and so on. People who enjoy that kind of cover and security and should never choose to do gig work, because it is for the very, very high risk personality type. And so if people are sort of stepping into the gig work space, they must make allowance for those things that companies would automatically cover for them. And so I often have these conversations where companies are saying, well, these consultants cost so much more than if we just had an internal person. It's actually not true. If you're looking at the actual number that a consultant would cost, they're factoring in the fact that there's no medical aid covered by a big organization and that they've got to save for their future and so on. So my best advice to someone who is stepping into or is currently in the gig workspace is you must make allowance in the way you structure your fees for that kind of cover, because it takes a lot of the risk away from being a gig worker.
How do you manage gig workers, though? What advice do you have for employers? Because, how should employees even embrace this kind of gig work? Do you find that a lot of companies or business owners or employers are more receptive to hiring people and embracing the gig economy? And how do you manage them?
Yes, I think in South Africa we still need to figure out the way. When I work internationally, I can see there's a greater ease in the USA or in Europe. There's a greater ease in places like in Asia, in Australia, of accepting the fact that part of your staff will be gig work and part of your staff will be permanent employment. The key factor here is to get everyone onto a similar platform for performance. So you're looking at platforms like Amplify, for instance, that has a gamification to it, where everyone gets to check in. They check in on themselves. They get to plug into a coach or a mentor online. It doesn't matter which time zone they're in. And in that way, you kind of can get everyone on the same even keel in terms of their performance. So there are ways of managing just the duality of having gig workers and permanent workers, as long as you have a platform where everyone can be on that same platform, especially when it comes to measuring KPIs and checking out performance.
I want to take some calls now and WhatsApps. It's 16 minutes after 11 o'clock. We're talking about the gig economy. Are you a type of person that prefers to just operate in a space where the strings are not attached for ever and ever and ever? You want this free market labor system where you can have a short-term contract, freelance work, but you don't want anything permanent, in-house job. And are you satisfied with the security, and how have you ensured that you've got security around your finances? Because you never know if the contract is going to be renewed. You never know if you'll get that next project. How do you navigate the gig economy? You can call on 011-883-0702. WhatsApp's on 072-702-1702.
Good morning, 702 family. My industry was rocked hard during COVID. And since then, my company does not hire full-time staff. We hire only freelancers. We are happy in the freelance world. And all the freelancers are honestly very happy with this type of arrangement. Sometimes it feels like it's biting us in the foot, especially during peak, where freelancers can go home with quite a lot of money. But then we know that there are slow months, there are winter months where our industry sort of takes a dip, and therefore we are able to then just be safe in that regard. But for my industry, 100% freelance only in my company.
That's fascinating. And Deshun, when you have the peak seasons, what responsibility does anyone in the gig economy have to ensure that, to the listener's point, that you are going to be okay when it's slow? Because it's a cycle, right? That period is coming where it's going to be slow. So what do you need to do to just add those layers of protection?
Yeah, I think this is again where that risk factor comes in, because it is one of the high risks of doing any kind of gig work, is that there will be peak seasons. In the consulting world, we call it feast or famine. So when you're doing well and it's peak season, you've got to take a little bit of the cream off the top and put it away, for those moments. Hopefully that doesn't last too long when you know there's a lower demand. And I also think what most freelancers are able to do is they're able to predict at which times of year, for instance, there would be a dip in income, a dip in demand for their services. For instance, in December, if you're an Uber driver, there might be a huge demand for your service during that time, but there might be a time when it's other school holidays, when everyone's away, especially if you're in a big city, where there isn't such a huge demand. So it's really just to understand the cycles and the seasons of your particular type of gig work and to make allowance for it.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Clement. I'm at a crossroad right now, right? So I am an audit consultant and I'm doing this on a contract basis, and I love the freedom. However, I do feel that it does give me some sort of anxiety because I am used to, the permanent contract, the 9 to 5, and. So as much as it's nice getting a contract, to be on contracted work, but it does bring some sort of anxiety because you don't have that, permanent employment stability or sense of stability that it brings. So, yeah, but if the opportunities are there for contract work and for, people in my field and so forth, I think it would bring a whole lot of comfort for me because I know that, okay, after this contract, I can hop onto the other. So, yeah, that's just my opinion. This is Pila from Benoni.
Hi, Clement. This is Anonymous from Midrand. I work as an independent, as a freelance actuary. I got my role through Outsized, so it's like independent broker thingy. So they help us with finding opportunities, and I'm happy. I'm happy with the decision that I took. I get to stay at home with the kids and do my work, and so yeah.
Oh dear, the kids all day. You're a brave dad. You're a really brave dad. Deshun, someone is asking also about company culture. Like, what impact does this gig economy have on company culture when you've got these people that are just, freelancing, they're on contract, they rarely come to the office, they want to work, outside, in their terms, as long as they deliver.
Yes, strangely enough, I did have a meeting with a client yesterday in the fast-moving consumer goods business, and they, for the first time in 8 years, they have their entire IT team from all across the country coming together into one room. And we were just talking about the impact of that, because even though these people are permanently employed, they never see each other. So now they have an opportunity to shape a new culture because there's new leadership and so on. So I think, we mustn't conflate the idea of gig work with faceless people. At the end of the day, there are still human beings that are sitting on those computers and, in front of those screens and cameras. And it's so important. It's vital, in fact, as we go further and further into how the gig economy will transform, that we do make the human connections. Because at the end of the day, an organization's culture has to do with the value system and the behaviors of the humans that work there, whether those humans are dispersed across the world or whether they are part of the same region. It is so important to get that connection time because actually you solve problems better when you kind of know a person, you've met them, you've shaken hands with them. So I do think there's opportunity for that. I think company culture as we know it might transform completely. You can see it with organizations like Facebook. They've got people all over the world working for Facebook who've never actually met each other, but there's a cohesion to the organization, there's a cohesion to the brand, and you can do that with any platform. Look at a variety of platforms in fact, I predict, and this might be true already, that gig work will actually become known as platform work because it is about which platform are you finding to do the gig work from. Fiverr, Facebook, Uber, all of these organizations are very good examples of that. So it's once the leadership sort of is able to ingrain a specific way of doing things and they're able to disseminate that to everyone else, and the person who signs up understands that that's what we stand for, ultimately that is what drives culture in an organization.
Hi, Clement, and your guest there. Isn't this in a way more or less like entrepreneurship? Because also, like, how do you get credit? How do you get a house? Not even a house. How do you rent an apartment? How do you? It's very difficult to navigate because whenever you try and get a house or a car or an apartment, sometimes even taking your kids to a certain school, they want some sort of security, They can see your bank statement says, yes, that's how much you made. But what about the days that are quiet? Like, how do you navigate around that?
Deshun?
Yes, it is a bit tougher because remember our economies are still very much set up to function in the 19th century and and the 20th century, and here we are sitting in the 21st century with 20th century thinking. So gig an entity and give it a brand and a name and formalize it as much as possible with compliance, with operation systems and so on. Even if you're working on your own, you can still set those things up. The more you become formal for yourself as the gig worker, the easier it becomes to showcase the fact that you've got a business that's going and you've got mechanisms in place to keep it sustainable. I think the risk factor when it comes to lending finance to assets like houses and cars and those kind of things, the banks obviously need to assess the risk, and the more you can minimize the risk for the lending institution, the better for yourself. So my best advice to people who are freelancing and doing gig work is to actually create a formal setup for yourself. Register the business, make it compliant, ensure that people can come and look at something that puts you in a position of credibility. And yes, keep your credit score as high as you possibly can. It is tough for gig workers because, like we said earlier, with seasonal income and with cyclical income, it can be difficult to keep a consistency to how you pay for things and how your income is viewed by the risk assessors of lending institutions. But it is vitally important that you try your very best to be able to do that. So just formalize it for yourself, register entity, be compliant, and try to keep a high credit score.
A message here from Anonymous says, I work as a freelancer or consultant and I prefer to work from home. My reasoning is that it serves my mental health. Not to say that I'm immune to burnout. It just means that I can take on as much or little work and still prioritize life. life. The downside is when budgets are cut. It's always the project workers that go first. In your observation, Deshun, is that the case?
That is absolutely true. So it's part of the risk of being a gig worker or even a platform worker is that, we must just understand that it mustn't be on a whim that you decide, oh, well, I'm just going to stop working full time now and go and do this thing that looks so cool when other people are doing it. There is definitely a huge risk factor. And like I said at the beginning of our chat, Clement, if you find yourself being the person who enjoys the consistency, the stability, and the security of having a job, stay in it. Because on the outside of that, there's so much you have to handle yourself. You've got to do your own finances, marketing, admin. You still got to implement. It comes down on your head if you don't have a team of other gig workers, because that's the nature of it. So it requires huge consideration in spite of how easy it seems to just do. It's not as easy. It requires huge consideration. And I do agree that your mental health is in your hands, much more in your hands when you're a gig worker than if you're working in a full-time job.
Yeah, Samu in Morningside says, Clement, I was a contractor for 12 years, and in the last year, I'm an independent consultant, sole proprietary. I found that I work harder as an independent, also sourcing multiple streams of income, than when I was an employee. Opportunities for growth, career-wise and economically, are far greater. And I wonder, Deshun, if people are not putting a lot of pressure on themselves when they are working as consultants or as freelancers, because now they've got to do everything themselves, and to cut costs and to maximize on profits, they end up just doing everything as opposed to get just 2 extra people to assist.
Absolutely. That is, especially in South Africa, it's the nature of the game. And I just wanted to say this as well. When you're gig working, your levels of excellence have to be so high because you're only as good as your last gig. So when you're full-time employed, there is a way to kind of still hide within the system where someone else can pick up for you if you were a little bit slack and there's a project that needs to be done by tomorrow or whatever. But if you're on your own, the chances that you can just hand over to someone else to assist or to do the thing better than you are slimmer. I'm not saying it's impossible, but your standard of excellence and your delivery needs to be at such a high level because that client needs to constantly be reassured that they're going to get the best standard from you, versus if you're full-time employed, someone else can pick it up and the company's brand won't necessarily suffer. But your brand as a gig economy worker will suffer if you slip up even once.
Yeah.
In some cases.
Yeah, Deshun, you've been great at navigating and helping us navigate this chat. Thank you for making time. Deshun Deysel is the founder and CEO of Go Peak International. It's exactly 11:30.